Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our very exciting session to discuss the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity in Neuroscience prizes. We have a very exciting panel for you today and hopefully a very lively discussion on this important topic. So welcome to, in our afternoon of the British Neuroscience Association meeting, to our panel. Today we're going to discuss the importance and provide insights in the processes behind the selection of prize winners, hopefully to discuss some insight in how to improve diversity and inclusion. We will discuss hopefully some aspects of possible explanations behind our current lack of diversity in many of these prizes, and the influence and the importance of these prizes, both in career determination and as well as the influence of these prizes on equity, diversity, and inclusion in neuroscience. We hope to share information together about initiatives that are currently underway amongst representation from our panel members today, and look at new ways that the neuroscience community can work together and different ideas that you, the audience, may provide on this. So my name is Tracy Bale. I am a professor in the departments of pharmacology and psychiatry and the director of the Center for Epigenetic Research in Child Health and Brain Development here at the University of Maryland School of Medicine in Baltimore, Maryland in the United States. I'm also the president of IBRO, and today, as chair of this panel, I represent both IBRO and ALBA. And ALBA is a networking organization that has started within the last, I guess, year and a half now, and is focused on bringing together the importance of representation, advocacy for inclusion and diversity across neuroscience in many different aspects. So if you are interested at all, please check out ALBA online and join and sign the diversity contract that we're interested in promoting for inclusion and representation in neuroscience. So with that, I'm going to begin by introducing our panel members, or rather by allowing them to introduce themselves so you can get an idea of who is here to discuss today. This is a very important topic. So I'm going to start off with Martin Meyer, who is the Scientific Program Director of the Brain Prize. Martin?
Hi, Tracy. Thanks for the introduction, and also thank you to Anne Cook for arranging this session. She's from the BNA, and also for inviting the Brain Prize, Richard and I, to participate. So my name is Martin Meyer. As Tracy said, I'm the director of the Brain Prize for the Lundbeck Foundation. I thought I'd not really talk about myself. I've come from a neuroscience background. I joined the foundation in 2018, and last year in August. And prior to that, I ran a neuroscience lab at King's College London. But I don't really want to talk about me. I think it's more informative if I say a little bit about the foundation, the Lundbeck Foundation that awards the prize, talk about the Brain Prize, the criteria for awarding the prize, but also share some statistics with you, which I think will hopefully be useful and put some things into context. So the Brain Prize is awarded by the Lundbeck Foundation. It's a Danish foundation. It's one of the largest commercial foundations in Denmark. And we use the financial returns from our investments and ownerships of biotech companies to fund academic research in Denmark. And broadly, our funding stream is divided into people, projects, and prizes. And the largest of those prizes is the Brain Prize. And the Brain Prize was first awarded in 2011, and up until 2018 it was a European prize, but since then it's a global prize. And the Brain Prize recognises advances in any area of neuroscience from basic through to clinical, and there are a number of criteria for receiving the prize or awarding the prize. Obviously the primary one is scientific excellence. The work and the scientists have got to be truly outstanding from a global perspective. The other criteria is that people who receive the prize, they still need to be active in research. And finally, people who win the prize must be nominated by others. Self-nomination is not accepted. And it's the job of the Brain Prize Selection Committee. This is an independent panel of 9 neuroscientists. It's their job to select for the nominees the eventual winners, and Richard will talk more about that. So I thought it'd be useful to share some data and statistics about the demographics of the winners and also the nominees. So in total, we've awarded the prize to 38 people from 10 different countries. So that's Canada, the US, and 8 different countries in Europe. 32 of those 38 winners are men and 6 are women. One feature of the Brain Prize is we really like to try and include everyone who's made the most significant contributions to a particular discovery. And so we tend to recognize teams of people. So at the minimum, we've awarded the prize to 2 people in any given year, and at most it's 6, and on average it's 3.5 per year. We get about 70 nominations per year for the Brain Prize. 78% of those nominations are for men, 22% are for women. 50% of those nominations come from the US, and the rest are predominantly from Europe. What about those who nominate? The number of nominators is quite variable. It's from 33 to or 34 to 66, and on average, 79% of the people who nominate are men, and 21% are female. 35% of the nominators from the US, and the remainder tend to be from Europe. And in terms of at least age and gender, the demographic of the winners is pretty close to the demographic of those that are nominated. And we realize that diversity in both of those demographics is limited, and it's something that we're really trying to change. Yeah, so that's pretty much from me and the Brain Prize.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Martin. Richard Morris, who is the chairman of the Brain Prize Selection Committee. Richard?
Hi. Yes, I'm Richard Morris, and I guess it's delighted to be here to join this session, and I guess I'm here as the current chair of the selection committee. And with respect to the specific theme that's we all really want to discuss, the issue of diversity, nothing would please me more than for this prize to be a visible reflection of the diversity of people working in all aspects of neuroscience. And gender is often at the front of people's minds, but there's race, geography, and also topic, the nature of the science that we're actually giving a prize for. So now, to date, the number of female winners of the Brain Prize has been limited, but as Martin has explained, in part that's due to the way in which the nomination process operates. Now, this particular prize, the Brain Prize, it's the world's largest scientific prize in neuroscience, and it covers discovery-orientated research and more applied translational research. And in that respect, it's slightly different from some other prizes, which tend perhaps to focus much more on the basic or discovery-orientated research. The selection committee, there are 9 of them. They're of both genders and many nationalities. There's 1 member from China at the moment, 1 from Australia, several from Europe, which of course I include the UK, and several from North America, and one of the North Americans is French. Now, a key thing to pass over is that the selection committee are not themselves allowed to nominate. And I think that's wise, because I think it would be bad if people imagine that was some sort of top-down or strategic aspect of the selection process. It's all driven by the nominations. Now, the candidates are submitted. There's a well-advertised open call. Anybody can submit, and all nominations are considered by the panel. And we tend to try to group topics together, because as you look at the list of past winners, they're often in groups. We do commission sort of pipeline papers because we're frightened that we might be missing important areas that we look at. And these provide a focus for discussion amongst the committee members, but they do not lead directly to nominations. Again, we strictly have this sort of bottom-up process by which we're guided by the nominations. I'd just like to mention one particular prize, or no, 2, I think. One was the prize for CADASIL in 2019. That's a very important, perhaps slightly unusual neurological condition, but it was won by a team of people who'd worked together for 40 years. It was led by Marie-Germaine Bousser in Paris with her colleagues Anne Hutel, Elizabeth Tournier-Lasserve, and Hugues Chabria. And they discovered a very unusual neurological condition, and they worked out the genetics of it. Then they built an animal model, and then they went on and did various imaging, and they're moving towards therapies. And to us, it just came across as the most amazing detective story, beautifully told, how the whole thing unraveled over, as I say, 40 years. And we were sort of blown away by it. Now, in contrast, let's take a very discovery-orientated one, which was the prize in the very first year, 2011. And it went to 3 scientists from Hungary who had actually not worked together as a team, just the opposite of the Marie-Germain one, but who knew each other well, Thomas Freund, Yuri Bushaki, and Peter Somogyi. So all males, working in Budapest, New York, and Oxford, respectively. And what that prize there, was long before I was on the committee, recognized was their fantastic contribution to rejuvenating modern neuroanatomy with single cell connectivity and so on. So that was really fantastic. I think the selection committee is dispassionate, and nobody has agendas. And if in any time anybody were perceived to have an agenda, I think their authority around the table would actually be decreased. But what we are looking for is whether a particular scientific development has opened fantastic new conceptual ground, has led to a radical new development of technology, such as the prize for optogenetics, or led to the development of a medicine that's affecting a large number of people, as this year with the prize for migraine and CGRP antagonists. I think that's probably as much as I should say at the moment. I maybe can come into questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Next, we have Emma Weinell, who is the BNA Committee Representative for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Emma, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm joining you from Cardiff in Wales in the UK. And as you heard from Tracy, I'm here because I'm Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Representative to the BNA Council and Committee. Specifically here with reference to the prizes that the BNA award, and they include outstanding contributions in neuroscience, public engagement of neuroscience, our student prizes, and more recently our credibility prizes. I think we've heard already from many of the panelists that there are some issues around the awarding of prizes, particularly in the narrow demographic that we see both in nominations and therefore people who are awarded prizes. And I hope today, though, that we can have some really meaningful and useful discussions and drive change, because I think we can do better than saying, we need more nominations. We absolutely do, but I think we also need to carefully consider that nomination process. And I hope that in these discussions today, we might be able to suggest some ways in which these processes may be able to change so that they allow a greater diversity of people to be nominated, but also some fundamental changes in those nomination processes. Because I think these prizes have a role, a really helpful and useful role in encouraging diversity and celebrating diversity in science and in neuroscience. But I don't think we're quite there yet necessarily.
Thank you, Emma. That was beautiful. Next up, we have Angela Roberts, who is the advisory board member for the Gruber Neuroscience Prize. Welcome, Angela.
Hi, everyone. So, yeah, my name's Angela Roberts, and I'm from the Department of Physiology, Development and Neuroscience in the University of Cambridge in the UK. And I joined the Gruber Prize committee about 4 years ago. So the Gruber Prize comes from the Gruber Foundation that was set up by Peter and Patricia Gruber, which was encouraging science initially in cosmology and in genetics. And then in 2004, they established a prize in neuroscience. They decided to use the Society for Neuroscience to actually help in the award of that prize. So in fact, the committee for the Gruber for the Neuroscience Prize actually comes from nominations from SFN itself. And we have about 8 of us on the committee, and we've certainly realized in the last few years since I've been on the committee that first of all, just in terms of trying to get more women nominations, it's been difficult, and we've been trying to actively pursue both geography, ethnicity, topic as well, as Richard mentioned, is a very important thing as well for trying to make sure you recognise across the different disciplines of neuroscience. In fact, I was only asked the other day, interestingly, by someone out of the blue, because they'd noticed I was on the committee, whether the Gruber Prize was particularly for molecular neuroscience. And I had to answer, well, no, it wasn't particularly for molecular neuroscience. We very much are supporting and wanting to celebrate all discovery science across neuroscience in any of the fields. But it just so happens that if you look at our list, a lot of the prizes have gone to the more molecular side of things. And as Richard was pointing out, some of the prizes are more discovery and not so clinically oriented. I think that's probably true for the Gruber. We tend to be primarily basic science, although we certainly will recognise when there is a really fantastic clinical application, but the main focus is on the actual basic science. So yes, if you look at our list from 2004, there have been 27 awards. Again, it's become more and more clear that we sort of end up nominating groups of people rather than singles. So over the years, there have been quite a number of single nominations, but now more recently, you can see that we're sort of awarding to 2 or 3 different people, again, to try and recognise the overall contribution that different people have made within a particular topical field. And then the final thing, but you notice though, there's only four women out of the 27 men. And it is primarily a lot of USA, North America, potentially Canada. There have been 1 or 2, one from China, a couple from Japan, and there's been a few scattered from Europe. But so on the committee, we are very much aware of this and are, as Richard said, it's difficult because you don't want the committee nominating, and I completely agree with that. But you do need to start trying to be active in trying to get the nominations in, because often we've had halfway through the year when the call's already gone out and we realise that the nominations coming in really aren't very broad at all. And so then we've had to start trying to actively encourage other people to think about nominating in order to try and make sure we get a really good set of relatively broad nominations before we start the process. And so that's been quite tricky, but we are beginning to sort of make inroads on that. So it's definitely a very active process from the committee to try and ensure that the nominations coming in are broad, because obviously once you've got the nominations, they're the ones you have to work with. So that's the important point of when you try and bring the diversity into it. So I think that's all I shall say to start with.
Beautiful. Thank you, Angela. Thank you again to all panel members here for agreeing to participate in this. So we have a number of questions that we're going to start out. There is the ability, if you are listening and have a question, to enter that into the comments box, and we'll start addressing those questions when we can. So I'm going to start off with a more general question for the panelists who represent a number of different prizes here. So that's our discussion point. That if we could start a discussion on what is really the ultimate purpose for a scientific prize. So whether it's the specific prize that you're working on or a more general idea, what do you think that, so Martin, do you want to start us off with an answer for what you think the purpose of awarding the scientific prize is?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, and I think you'll get 10 different answers from 10 different people. I think that there are many reasons. So the obvious one is recognizing and rewarding fantastic neuroscience. But I think there are a couple of things that maybe, I've never won a big prize, so I can't say this myself, but I think there are a couple of things that prizes are good for. And the first is, it's like a stamp saying 40 years of work now accepted. It's a very concrete acceptance of sometimes a lifetime's work. And the other thing which occurred to me just the other day is it's a tick box in history. A lot of people who've done fantastic work, unless you're interested in their topic, they will not be remembered in 100 years' time. But what you will get as a result of being rewarded a prize is your name on a list that's going to be there for a long time. So I think these are the things that are perhaps not so well appreciated beyond simply recognizing great science. But those are my thoughts.
Anyone else? Anyone want to comment on the role that these prizes might play in someone's career trajectory? Richard?
Well, a couple of comments. I think the first thing to say is that there are a whole variety of different sorts of scientific prizes. And some of them, through their very name, are directed to particular kinds of individuals. Let's take the 3-minute Thesis Prize, which has got very popular in Britain. It's a lovely prize, and we here in Edinburgh encourage PhD students to have a go at it. Can they capture in 3 minutes what their thesis is all about? And it's super, and it's great fun to hear these talks particularly when they're good, you know. So that's a lovely one. There's another one that Lundbeck runs. The Brain Prize is their main one, but another one is they give a prize every year for the best science teacher in schools, which they do jointly with the newspaper. And then there's a big full-page article about that particular individual and comments from the kids in the class and so on. So that's another kind of thing. It's very clear what it's directed at. But coming back to the sort of really high-profile prizes like the Brain Prize or the Gruber or Kavli and so on, I think there's a range really here, which has to do with, has there been some, not just 40 years worth of work, I emphasized that earlier in relation to the detective story behind Codicil, but has there been some massive conceptual understanding that has come from a particular person or a particular group of people, or even rivals working in competition with each other, but have led to great discoveries? And when one thinks of, say, the Nobel Prize to Crick and Watson, that would be an example of that kind of prize. Another might be one where the science in some respects is not particularly novel conceptually, but what it's led to is a development of a new medicine, which is then affecting thousands or millions of people. And that also, we think, is prizeworthy. We were delighted to be able to offer such a prize this year. So I think there are sort of a variety of different kind of criteria. Now, finally, the award of these prizes should, of course, reflect the diversity of people working in the field. And at the moment, it doesn't. And we need to do something about that. I've already said that I really would strongly oppose the selection committee being allowed to nominate or some steering in some way. We have to work with the nominations that come in. And Lundbeck does absolutely everything it can to advertise that, there's a call. And it'll start in relatively soon. It'll run till September, and literally anybody can nominate.
So Richard, can you comment for the audience then, yep, as an example of what you're talking about? When you see the nominations coming in and see that, for instance, they're all men, can the selection committee, knowing that, or at some level the Lundbeck, then solicit? Can you go out after more nominations?
Right.
Is that a strategy?
Yeah. So I don't see the nominations coming in. They go into the office in Copenhagen. Now the problem, what you raise is a very interesting issue. How do you do it? Because I'm very wary about suggesting to people to nominate, because it sort of creates an expectation that if they do, that they will be successful. So it has to be handled in a very careful way. And I'm slightly against members of the selection committee actively going up to somebody saying, look, you must nominate such and such a person. I just feel uncomfortable about that. But at the same time, you raise a very good point, Tracy, that if despite all these efforts, having it on the web, having it in Nature and Science and so on and so forth, if the nominations don't come in a gender diverse way, it's a shame. And I think we could be trying to do various things, particularly on geographical diversity. And I think actually Lundbeck's done quite a bit. We've spoken at the Japanese Neuroscience Society. I've spoken in India about the prize. So we are really trying to be a world prize. And
So
we just have to keep going, I think.
I see Angela and Emma have their hands up. So Angela, do you want to comment?
Well, I just want to say I completely agree. You can't have the committee trying to get nominations in. Absolutely not. However, when you can encourage people in a field to nominate people from their field if they think that they're worthy of the Gruber. So that's how we're seeing it as a role of the committee. To when you start seeing nominations coming in, and you sort of see what the spread is, and then actually actively getting out people to say, look, have you thought about trying to nominate people in your field? So you're not asking for nominations of people, you're asking for nominations in fields. And I think that's different, but that helps to try and spark. And obviously when you're asking people, you're saying, and do please remember, don't just give me the same old names. Because the one thing I've noticed, sitting on the committee for 3 or 4 years, and you get this, but this isn't specific to neuroscience prizes or any prizes. This is specific. This is kind of, you see it everywhere, that once people get known, the BBC have lovies. The BBC have people that they constantly, once they've done a show and they seem to be quite good, they use them and you find them all over the place on the BBC.
Human nature, Angela, human nature, whatever's easiest.
But that's what happens in this as well. You see that once people start to get a prize, then suddenly their names get seen. People actually see their science a bit more. They get more exposure. And then suddenly they become more likely to potentially be seen again for another prize. And so this is, in all walks of life, but it's still something you have to try and avoid, to try and keep spread, because there's so many good scientists out there.
So to that point, maybe Emma can address this. What are our thoughts on, clearly these big prizes have selection committees. Could they also have a separate committee in charge of drumming up diversity and inclusion in the nominations? So they're not part of the selection committee, but it's actually a separate committee tasked with trying to get in better diverse nominations. Is that, Emma?
Well, I'd like to kind of track back a bit if I could, in that I do think we have a problem with the lack of diversity in nominations, but I have to go back to the question, why is that? I don't want nominations to be tokenistic in any way whatsoever. That isn't helpful to anyone. But why is that an issue? And I think if there are prizes and people think, I might nominate somebody for that, but if they don't believe that they're likely to win, based on the history of particular prizes, then that is problematic. Nominations take time and energy and effort, and I think we do need to be looking at these processes and procedures. So carefully considering things like the anonymity of prizes, whether they kind of give identifiable information away, that process. And I know Martin mentioned earlier about self-nomination versus people nominating you. That's a really interesting area of discussion. Personally, I would love to see sections on prizes to look at things like mitigating factors, extenuating circumstances, so that if people are happy and comfortable to declare those factors that have affected their research and their career, then they can do, and that can be taken into account at selection committees. I think that is so vital in the current times that we're living in COVID. Things like caring responsibilities, illness, bereavement, these are all factors that as scientists and as people influence our work and what we achieve. So I would like those to be taken into account as well. I think we need to track back and think about, what kind of influences people to nominate others. People who are very well connected, maybe more likely to be nominated, and that shouldn't be the case. So I think we really need to consider that process and think back to actually, okay, we've got an issue here in that there is a lack of diversity in the nominations, and what can we do to overcome that barrier, that obstacle?
Thank you, Emma. Does anyone want to comment? We have a lot of questions coming in. Ann Cook has some great questions on why do we think that men are more likely to make the nominations? Those are data that Martin and Richard were initially talking about for the Brain Prize, that not only are men more likely to be nominated, but more likely to do the nomination. So I think that's an important point for us to discuss. Anybody have any insight they want to share on why that might be? Emma pointed out that maybe there's some connections or aspects of seniority that might play a role, or are women feel like they're less likely to receive a nomination, therefore less likely to do the nominating? Is that Emma, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to pick up on this idea of role models. So, many prizes follow this idea of, they're highlighting role models, which is great. But if you don't see yourself in the winners of those prizes, that can be incredibly difficult. I think things like imposter syndrome and people feeling isolated, they don't see themselves in the winners of prizes. I think that is problematic in nominations. But I mentioned kind of caring responsibilities, and we've seen, haven't we, in terms of gender and the lack of diversity in prizes, perhaps that is an issue. We are considering gender in quite a binary way at the moment as well, I'd like to recognise. But I think, there is this problem around championing oneself, or, giving permission to others, to nominate you. And I think that that's particularly problematic for women. So, that's why I'm really interested in this self-nomination versus others nominating, and the connections that people have. I think that, there is work to do around that, around, your own kind of confidence, and that you are good enough. When that imposter syndrome strikes, to overcome that, I'd love to see, for example, nominations in confidence sent to people who are nominated, both to check for accuracy, because sometimes without kind of any malicious intent, things get misinterpreted, to check it's correct. But also, I think everybody to an extent has imposter syndrome to various degrees. So, file that nomination away, and when you're having a bad Friday afternoon, open it up, and somebody's taken the time and energy and effort to nominate you for an award, and that's amazing. You might not win that award, but somebody has taken the time to put you forward for it, and
that's of course addressing the issue of diversity and representation in wanting to be nominated. I still think there's some question as to the nominators. And a lack of diversity even there. Angela, I see you nodding your head. Do you have some thoughts on why we lack diversity in just the nominators?
I'm not really sure I do. I don't know whether, we were talking about networks and, how networked you are. It'd be interesting to see whether there's a difference across gender in terms of networks. Because that could then could feed into that from the nominations side of things. But yeah,
it's definitely a tough question, but it certainly contributes. If we're looking for better representation in the nominations, which group is more likely to then to try and increase that? I think increasing the way in which we solicit, there might be ways in which we could do to more diverse groups. For instance, ALBA is very much working on this as a topic to think about ways to, as part of the advocacy, to ensure that a lot of these prizes, to encourage nominations. I think that more groups that do that across not just the US or Europe, but globally, would be very impactful. Richard, did you have some thoughts?
Well, one thing to add is that the way the selection committee and the Brain Prize operates is that the time window for nominations closes in September, and we then meet towards about the middle of October, and we, on the committee, every single person reads every single candidate. We're not they're not parceled up in the way that, say, grant applications done to a study panel. And then we meet and discuss those and develop a shortlist. Now, once we've got a shortlist, which is actually a pretty long shortlist, we then go out for referee comments, and we try to do that in a gender balanced way, getting as many female commentaries as male, provided the people is knowledgeable in that area. So that's one step which we can take internally, and we need to continue to work on that. The second point I'd like to make is that there's one of the questions in the BNA comments list about are we looking at people from outside Europe or North America? Yes, we are. We're got an application. I'm obviously not going to say who it is, but we've had applications from people in Australia, people in India, and we do take geographical diversity very seriously as well. And I'm delighted that that's happening. Science is an activity without frontiers, and we should be recognizing that aspect visibly in the prize too.
So Richard, could you comment on I guess the question I threw out that Emma also chimed in on, which is, what are your thoughts on if the selection committee shouldn't participate in seeking nominations? Could every large prize also think about having a diversity committee who's tasked with trying to reach out and obtain a wider diversity in the nominations so that the selection committee remains unbiased, but yet you're still working for that prize to try and garner up better representation? Is that something that prizes could do?
I think that's really one for Martin to answer rather than me. You've got the nomination process being widely advertised, and we've made a film this year, Martin and I, saying this is open to anybody to nominate. It's hard for me to know what more one can do than that. So if without raising too many expectations, but sure. Martin may have further comments.
So I think any initiative we have to raise diversity is got to be broad. As Richard said, we can't target individuals, and so clearly one of the areas of diversity we need to increase is geographical diversity. We get very few nominations from Asia, and so it's really pretty much down to me and the Brain Prize team to correct that. And so what do we do? So one of the things we've done is contact all the neuroscience societies from countries where we're not getting nominations and saying, what can we do? Why aren't we getting nominations? What can we do to change that? And the idea for making the film about the nomination process actually came from a conversation with a member of the Japanese Society of Neuroscience. And part of the reason he said, well, we don't know about it. And not only do we not know about it, we don't know about the process. And if we don't trust in the process, then we won't engage with it. And that was a very striking conversation. And we acted on that advice. We made the film. So I think the best we can do is to let people know how the nomination process works and let them know that it's open and that anyone can nominate. I think that's as much as we can do for now.
Okay, so I want to move on to one of our other topics because I see some questions on this, and I think this is important for our panel to discuss, is how do we see what is the importance, the value in these, not what they're for, but the individuals. I think Angela mentioned this, that an individual wins one of these prizes and then they're more likely to, again, because it's easy for their name to come up again and again. So what other aspects of these prizes might be important for an individual's career trajectory? Why is it worthwhile to nominate somebody or to see diversity in the nomination and winner pool? What does that do for careers? What's the value? Angela?
Well, I guess that's getting at role models, isn't it really? The fact that if you're sort of seeing who's out there doing kinds of research that may sort of be similar to what you're doing, it gives you a feeling that you might be on the right path. So that's why you want it to be diverse topics as well, because you want to see, you like the person who asked me the other day, is it always molecular neuroscience that gets it for the Gruber? And it's like, well, no, and we're not trying to do that. It's just the way it happens to come through. But it's seeing, and also I think it's when you see when prizes have been given and actually see, it helps you to see what the process was of those discoveries and how long it took, and the sort of dogged determination often of just fighting your way through the science year in, year out, trying to follow something that perhaps other people thought was a waste of time. But I think all of those things come together to help promote science and help people see the different ways science can be done and can be achieved in different ways. So that must, in that sense, help inspire people. But then that's why you want a diversity. Otherwise, it's not going to inspire anyone if it's all the same sort of group of people doing the same kind of stuff.
Right. So don't we, in fact, as scientists, by awarding these big prizes that we know come with a level of validation and esteem and career success, we're, in fact, as a group, we're rubber stamping that we are prioritizing or validating specific areas of research. And so what I hear you saying is that the importance of the diversity of neuroscience areas is also really important to ensure that we see a wealth. And I think to that point, Angela, what you said earlier about the same people, it's also because it becomes the same area. So if we say, well, we're valuing molecular or synaptic plasticity or whatever as we think this is the real neuroscience and all the other stuff kind of filters below that, then isn't it more likely that those things are going to, again, rise to the top in a number of prizes, and it sort of becomes a self-perpetuating of the people and the areas. And so thinking, and I agree very much, Angela, with what you're saying, that the area of neuroscience also, as well as the diversity of representation for gender and geographical and inclusion. I did a quick search, and so I wanted to enter this into the conversation. That not only who was winning prizes, I actually went through for some of the Brain Prize and a couple of SFN's big prizes and looked at the press releases for when a man won versus when a woman won. And I think this enters into what I want to enter into our conversation, which is the unconscious bias, that we think we don't have a bias, but in fact, certain things slip out that we're unaware of. So I want to see if the panel hears any difference in the language used when press releases are done. So here's some of the words describing the research for women: unique contributions, positive influence, remarkable, pioneering spirit. Here's the words used when men win the same prize: conceptually brilliant, technically brilliant, revolutionary, pioneering, groundbreaking, seminal, pioneering. So I do think that this unconscious bias piece, which is difficult, it's difficult to pinpoint, it's difficult for us to grasp, but it exists. And I think that language that comes out when we even talk about it's not hard and fast, but it's clear when you go through a number of these press releases that how we even think about when somebody of a more diverse background or area wins a prize, how we even describe that prize, then again can perpetuate the strength of how that is received. I think it's important.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, Tracy, and probably that reflects a lot on unconscious bias in journalists, and including science journalists as much as in. I want to be careful not to talk too specifically about individual prizes, but it's difficult to come at the very issue that you're talking about now without mentioning specific individuals. And if I may, I'd just like to touch for a moment on Huda Zogby, who won the Brain Prize last year and who actually spoke yesterday at the BNA. She arrived as a young medical student from the Lebanon at the age of 21 to the United States, and really struggled to get into a medical school in the United States. They weren't really sure about taking in an Arab woman, and it was quite tough for her. She couldn't get into the big Ivy League colleges, but she's a very determined lady, as you saw. And and then got this post in Texas and has been developing things ever since. And then bumped into these 3 girls with this strange syndrome that developed when they were 3-4 years old, and decided to just go for it. So something about her spirit and determination, which I think was important, and then leading on to discovering that a gene that Adrian Bird, who's not a neuroscientist, a cell biologist, had discovered, was playing a part. So that's an example, I think, the Rett Prize of a topic which reflects interdisciplinarity in biomedical sciences too. So it's a kind of surprise. We shouldn't just look for neuroscientists, we should look for others. And the same was true in the Optogenetics Prize, where there it's 6 men, I admit, but 3 of them are German biochemists who worked out the whole idea of light-activated opsins, and then others realized the potential of that and brought it into neuroscience and are helping to revolutionize the way the subject's done through gain-of-function experiments. So I think the topic does matter, and we're constantly trying to spot things that are really having an impact. The whole change from electrophysiology, from being at the end of looking at signals at the end of a wire to looking down a confocal microscope, that's been a revolution happening, and again we tried to recognize that.
Thank you, Richard. Emma, go ahead.
Thanks, Tracy. I wondered if I could just pick up on a comment that we've got in the comment section from Meyer around diversity and inclusion training, particularly as you mentioned unconscious bias, and whether selection committees have that training. I think it's fair to say that there's variability in that type of training, but the first obstacle really is recognizing that we all have some degree of unconscious bias, and that can be really tough to recognize, but it's there and it exists, and we have to acknowledge and appreciate that. And that some of the best unconscious bias training I've been to is people talking about their lived experiences. We've had some great sessions around lived experiences within the festival program. So I wondered whether anyone else in the panel wanted to pick up on the selection committees and the training around diversity and inclusion that people on the selection committees receive, if any.
So for the Lundbeck Foundation, we don't provide training for the selection committee members, and we don't ask if they've had unconscious bias training. So the second half of the question that was posted was about how do we select them, and we look for diversity. We look for gender diversity, we look for geographical diversity, and as Richard has alluded to, we look for diversity in the field of neuroscience that they represent. So those are the main criteria that we use when assembling the selection committee members. I'm sure many of them have had unconscious bias training. When I was at King's, it was compulsory to go through it. Yes,
I've done it too.
And I know Richard's done it.
Is there not a reason to make it compulsory as being on the panel?
It's something that we could ask. It's a really good idea. I think it's something we should do. I think it's a great idea.
I think there was a question in the thing here that said something about what are you doing to ensure you have. Sorry, I don't know where it disappeared to, Martin. But there was a question as to diversity on your panel. How do you? Question, but
I think I caught that
question on diversity of your panel.
So I'm not sure if she's referring or he's referring to the Brain Prize panel specifically, or our other panels. But this year, our Brain Prize selection committee consists of 4 women and 5 men. And as Richard said, they come from all over the world, from China, Australia, the US, and Europe. So I think we're doing as much as we can. I think we're pretty happy with the representation we have so far in terms of gender, geography, and certainly field of neuroscience.
Great, thank you. So one of the other points that is being made is ensuring, and I think this goes back to when I was reading out the comments from when a woman wins a prize versus a man, just in general, and ensuring that it doesn't just become a sort of token-esque win, that they're the same, which is a fine line. I think that this question speaks to the point, but again, it comes back to this idea that ensuring that we're including diversity and representation and considering them and soliciting the nominations, which seems to be one of the gatekeeping processes here to ensure that we're getting that nomination. What are the steps we can take to ensure that we're not unconsciously putting this out there? How do you ensure that the diversity is being, the importance of the diversity is discussed without making it token-esque? And I think that is a really difficult question, because you want to, of course, highlight when you have representation in your winner, because it is that representation that's important to see, but then how do you do it without, in a way of making the winner feel like they're a token? I think that is a really tough topic to even think about how we handle. Emma, do you have any experience in this?
I think it's really difficult because when you're starting from a point of view where the demographic is very narrow, anything outside of that could be viewed tokenistically, and that is incredibly challenging. I think that is a problem, and someone's mentioning decolonization of neuroscience. I've just come from a really interesting session on decolonization of teaching in neuroscience. I think that there are similar discussions that need to be had around the awarding of prizes. As well, I'd hate for anybody to with a tokenistic win, things like that. But it is a very, very fine line, particularly when your history, the history of winners, is very narrow in its demographic. So we have to change somewhere. It has to change at some point, and I think it has to change.
But Tracy, I think one way of avoiding tokenism is giving winners the opportunity to talk about the science that they won the prize for. So rather than identifying a female winner and saying, oh, you're a woman, isn't it great that you won a prize? Don't do that. Just give them plenty of opportunities to talk about the science that they won the prize for and leave it at that. That's my opinion. I think the science is good enough. It should speak for itself. Huda talking at the BNA yesterday, there was no mention of the fact that she was a female prize winner. She won a prize for great science.
She was a prize winner. Yeah.
I think that is critical. I really do. I agree that being able to talk about the science for which you have won a prize, rather than what's your life story on how you were able to overcome diversity to get here, is what things tend to happen. And I think that is.
Well, I think both are important, though, Tracy. I agree. Yesterday was handled beautifully, and she just talked about the science, exactly. But actually, sometimes, if you want to talk about role model, some of competing against some of the obstacles that have been put in the way in the past is an interesting thing to hear about, actually, too. I'd just like to come back to geographical diversity. I'm obsessed by it, but I think that having gone from a European prize to a world prize, I think that Lundbeck has to pay a lot of attention to geographical diversity. And I don't think it's, the previous director of the Brain Prize spoke in Japan, and Martin's talked about the various things he's wanting to do to try to encourage this. But we're not the only organization with this problem. If you look at fellows at the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, they're virtually all from the West Coast and from the East Coast, and there's hardly any in what they call the red states. And that's a problem. And so you've got to deal with it somehow. So I think geographical diversity is not to be forgotten about.
That's I think agreed, is an exceptional point to ensure that we're not overlooking or being dismissive of I think Angela pointed out earlier, diversity in the types of neuroscience as well as where it's being done. Yeah, very, very important. Emma, did you have something you wanted to add? I saw your hand over there.
Yeah, no, I think it was largely covered, but something we perhaps haven't touched on is this idea of individual prizes when science is, a collaborative exercise. happen. And, you know, I'm mindful of the time, but I think we do need to recognise that and touch upon that. You know, some people who win prizes are incredibly, you know, good in recognising the wider contributions of the whole team, because, you know, we have to accept there are huge teams, you know, behind some of the best science that goes on in the world. So that's a challenge as well that I think we need to be aware of and to recognise.
Yeah, I agree completely.
And I think perhaps another thing to think about is, in many cases, the prizes at the moment, as far from my understanding of it, tend to be personal, the prize money. And I think the other thing to think about is, one, how much prize money is being used, the different prizes, you know, should how much do we think is an appropriate amount, and how much can it, you know, is the sky the limit? And also, you know, should it be personal? Should it be more lab, more research oriented? I don't know the answer to this, but I'm just other things that I thought about, you know, that are worth thinking about in this.
Well, I think that's an important topic, Angela. Let's discuss that as our last point here before we get cut off. Is, do we think that this prize money should be personal, or should it be for the lab?
Because I was thinking of what Emma said about, you know, recognition of the labs and everything that these have come from, is that the prizes are personal.
Yeah.
But then I think there's also potential issues around this idea of, you know, my lab and ownership over, you know, people and students in particular. I don't see any harm in having a mixture, actually, Angela, of, you know, personal award and awards that is, you know, used by the lab. And, you know, I think some of the, you know, really important points around recognizing that this is a team effort. This really is a team effort. And many people do that in, you know, accepting awards, recognizing that it is, you know, a whole team of people that are behind the work that's gone on. But I think that's important to come out of.
So Emma, are you saying to share the money personally, like as income with the lab, or to put it back into the research of the lab?
So I love to see it back into the research that everybody's doing, working hard at, you know, as an acknowledgement that, you know, they're doing a great job. Thank you.
So do you think the lab, typically of the types of research that are the labs that win, the PIs who win these awards, need more money for their lab? I think they tend to be very well funded individuals.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that goes back to the discussions we had earlier around the same old faces. You know, we need to get more diversity in terms of the people that we're approaching and being nominated. It goes back to that process, having trust in that process, that if you're spending the time and effort and energy in nominating, that it's going to be taken seriously. And there aren't going to be any unconscious biases that are going to, you know, push your nominations to the side, or, you know, have them thrown out at an early stage.
So I think I'm not hearing I think to Angela's point about, especially these large prizes, you know, 1.3 million, or I forget what the brain prize is, quite large. Yeah, should that money, is it more incentive if it is money going into someone's bank account, or if it's going into someone's research lab? And does it matter? Is that important? Richard, Martin?
I mean, incentive for who? I mean, I think we have to remember that these people are nominated by others.
Sure.
So the people who actually get the money were not themselves involved in the process of getting awarded the prize.
Okay, how about the perception of the value of a prize? Let's from that perspective.
I mean, Richard's a prize winner. It'd be good to get his perspective on this, but I think the recognition is probably more important than the money.
Richard?
Yes, I try to keep a low profile about having won the thing. I've been very pleasantly surprised by a number of events that have happened. I mean, when I did have the privilege to win with two outstanding scientists and good friends, Graham Collingridge and Tim Bliss, and an event was organized at the Royal Society later that year, and we were a bit uncertain, you know, would people be jealous? Would anybody bother to come? The room was absolutely packed, and you could see that there was genuine pleasure on the part of lots of people in British neuroscience that we'd won the prize. I mean, Tim's a very popular man anyway, and perhaps it was all down to Tim, I don't know. But and it was just a lovely occasion in which we sort of felt we shared it.
So we're about to.
I also attended when Eric Kandel, when Eric Kandel introduced David Hewell and Torsten Wiesel, who just won the Nobel Prize at the Society for Neuroscience in Los Angeles.
All right.
And,
Richard,
just a moment. Let me just tell you this story because it's really important.
We're going to be cut off in about 10 seconds. Is all I'm saying, Richard. Go ahead.
There you go.
Okay. I just want to say thank you to all, and thank you to our panelists, and again, thank you to Anne for organizing this really important session.
Sure. Well, thank
Richard,
you.
do you want to take us out with your story until we get cut off?
Well, it's just that Torsten Wiesel said he wanted to share the prize with everybody. And everybody clapped, and then David Hewell came out and said, "I'm not sharing the money. I'm happy to share the honor."
The ultimate truth comes out again. All right. Well, thank you all again. It's been a fantastic panel, and hopefully the message is out there to nominate. If we want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Really,
please
we'd be delighted. We'd be delighted.
Take the time to nominate. So again, thank you all, and thank you for participating. And again, thank you to Anne for organizing for this great panel.